The cruel proposition, Marcus Blackwood, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, surveying the city that bowed to his technological empire. At 32, he commanded a fortune worth billions, yet satisfaction remained. As elusive as smoke, his reflection stared back, sharp jawline, steel-grey eyes, and the kind of handsomeness that graced magazine covers but never softened into genuine warmth. The quarterly family dinner loomed like a storm cloud. Another evening of his mother's passive-aggressive commentary about his bachelor status, his father's disapproving glances at his lifestyle choices, and his sister's smug superiority as the responsible heir who'd married appropriately within their social circle. "Sir?" James Chen, his assistant, appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. "The car is ready for the family dinner." Marcus turned, a slow smile spreading across his face, the kind that made business rivals nervous. "Cancel it." "Sir? I have a better idea." Marcus moved to his mahogany desk, fingers drumming against the polished surface. "Tell me, James, what would horrify my family more than anything?" James shifted uncomfortably. After 5 years working for Marcus, he recognized that particular gleam in his boss's eyes. "I'm not sure I should speculate. A marriage." Marcus's smile widened. Not to some blue-blooded debutante they'd approve of, but to someone completely beneath their precious standards, someone who would make them choke on their champagne and question everything they believe about bloodlines and breeding. The plan crystallized with ruthless clarity. Marcus had always excelled at identifying weaknesses and exploiting them. His family's greatest weakness was their suffocating obsession with appearances, with maintaining their position in New York's elite society. They'd built their identity around exclusivity, around being better than everyone else. "The staff at the estate," Marcus continued, pacing now with predatory grace. "Someone from the kitchen, perhaps, or housekeeping, young, pretty, completely inappropriate by their standards." "Mr. Blackwood, are you suggesting a marriage of convenience? Purely transactional?" Marcus's voice carried the cold calculation that had built his empire. "I'll provide generous compensation, of course, enough to change someone's life completely. In return, I get the satisfaction of watching my family's world implode." James's expression reflected his growing concern. "And after you've made your point, a quiet annulment, no harm done." Marcus shrugged, already mentally cataloguing the household staff at the family estate. "It's perfect, James. They marry for status and money. I'll give them the ultimate slap in the face by marrying for spite." The irony wasn't lost on him. His parents had orchestrated their own loveless marriage for social advancement, producing children like chess pieces in their game of societal dominance. His sister had married a pharmaceutical heir, not for love, but for the merger it represented. Now Marcus would flip their game entirely. "Research the current staff at Blackwood Manor," he instructed. "Someone with financial pressures, someone desperate enough to accept such an arrangement." His laugh held no warmth. "Someone who won't develop inconvenient romantic notions." As James reluctantly made notes, Marcus felt the familiar rush of a plan coming together. He'd spent his adult life dismantling competitors and conquering markets through strategic manipulation. This would be his masterpiece, a personal victory that would finally put his sanctimonious family in their place. The city lights twinkled below like stars within reach. Marcus had seized everything he'd ever wanted through calculated moves and relentless ambition. This marriage charade would be no different. A business transaction with a delicious personal payoff. He imagined his mother's horrified expression, his father's apoplectic rage, the whispers that would follow them through every country club and charity gala. The Blackwood name would survive the scandal, but their arrogance might finally receive the humbling it deserved. Marcus returned to the window, his reflection now showing satisfaction rather than restlessness. Tomorrow he would set his plan in motion. Tomorrow he would find his unwitting accomplice in this perfect revenge. He had no way of knowing that his carefully constructed game would soon become the most dangerous gamble of his life. The innocent acceptance rose. Sullivan's hands trembled as she folded the crisp white linens in the Manor's laundry room. The industrial washers hummed their familiar rhythm, but today even routine tasks couldn't calm her racing thoughts. Dr. Martinez's words echoed relentlessly. 6 months, maybe less. The treatments aren't working anymore. Her mother, Catherine Sullivan, had raised Rose alone after her father's death in a construction accident when she was 12. Catherine had worked 3 jobs to keep food on their table, cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at night, and taking in sewing on weekends. When Rose turned 18, Catherine had insisted she take the live-in position at Blackwood Manor. "Education, Rosie," her mother had said, pressing Rose's acceptance letter to community college into her hands. "Promise me you'll use this job to better yourself. Don't end up like me, breaking your back for pennies." Rose had kept that promise, working in the Manor's kitchen during the day and studying business administration at night. For 3 years, she'd maintained perfect grades while sending every spare dollar to help with her mother's medical bills. The cancer diagnosis had come just as Rose was preparing for her final semester. "Miss Sullivan?" Mrs. Hendricks, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you in the library. Immediately." Rose's stomach dropped. In 3 years, she'd maybe exchanged 50 words with Marcus Blackwood. He was a distant figure who swept through the manor occasionally, usually with beautiful women who looked through the staff like they were furniture. What could he possibly want with her? The library intimidated her with its towering shelves and leather-bound volumes. Marcus stood with his back to her, examining a first edition that probably cost more than she'd earned in 5 years. "You wanted to see me, sir?" He turned, and those piercing grey eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. Rose became acutely aware of her simple grey uniform, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her hands still damp from laundry work. "Sit down, Miss Sullivan." She perched on the edge of an antique chair that could probably fund her mother's treatment for months. "I have a proposition for you, an unusual one." Marcus moved to his desk, retrieving a folder. "I understand your mother is ill. Terminal cancer. Expensive treatments not covered by insurance." Rose's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know about my employees' circumstances." His tone remained businesslike, almost clinical. "Your mother owes approximately $200,000 in medical debt. You've depleted your college fund trying to help her." Tears threatened, but Rose lifted her chin defiantly. "If you're going to fire me for poor performance, quite the opposite." Marcus opened the folder, revealing documents that made her head spin. "I'm prepared to offer you $5 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. Rose gripped the chair arms to steady herself. "I don't understand." "Marriage, Miss Sullivan, a temporary arrangement, purely contractual. You would become my wife for exactly 1 year." Rose stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Your wife?" "In name only," Marcus clarified quickly. "Separate bedrooms, minimal public appearances. Think of it as employment with extraordinary compensation. You would have access to the best medical care for your mother, complete financial security, and enough money to build whatever life you choose afterward." "But why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why me?" Something flickered in Marcus's expression, too quick for her to interpret. "Let's say I have my reasons for needing a wife who won't develop romantic expectations. Someone who understands this is strictly business." Rose's mind reeled. $5 million would save her mother's life and secure their future beyond her. Wildest dreams. But marriage, even fake marriage, to Marcus Blackwood seemed impossible. "I need time to think. Your mother doesn't have time." Marcus's words cut like surgical steel. "I spoke with Dr. Martinez this morning. She needs immediate treatment that insurance won't cover, treatment that costs more than you'll earn in 20 years. The cruelty of using her mother's condition to pressure her decision made Rose's chest tight with rage and desperation. But he wasn't wrong. Every day they delayed treatment made recovery less likely. "1 year," she whispered. "1 year. You'll live here at the estate, appear at a few social functions, and maintain the pretense of marriage. After 12 months, we divorce quietly. You disappear with your money, and I get what I need from the arrangement." Rose closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's brave smile as she pretended the pain wasn't getting worse. Catherine had sacrificed everything for Rose's future. How could Rose not do the same for her mother's life? "I'll need it in writing," she said finally. "Every detail, every expectation, every protection for both of us." Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. "Spoken like someone who paid attention in business classes. James will have contracts ready by tomorrow." As Rose left the library on unsteady legs, she wondered what she'd just agreed to. Marcus Blackwood was offering her salvation wrapped in silk, but she suspected the price would be higher than either of them imagined. That night, she held her mother's frail hand in the hospital room and whispered, "Everything's going to be okay. Mama, I promise." She just prayed she could keep that promise without losing herself in the process. The wedding charade. Victoria Blackwood adjusted her Chanel suit for the 3rd time, her manicured fingers betraying the anxiety she refused to show publicly. The garden at Blackwood Manor had been transformed overnight into a wedding venue that would grace the society pages if anyone had been invited to witness this catastrophe. "This is a nightmare, Thomas." Victoria's whisper carried the sharp edge of barely controlled panic. "Our son is marrying the help, the kitchen staff, for God's sake." Thomas Blackwood's jaw worked silently as he watched the florists make final adjustments to arrangements that had cost more than most people's annual salary. At 65, he'd built the family empire through calculated decisions and strategic alliances. Marcus's rebellion threatened everything. "We could still stop this," Victoria continued. "Claim he's having a breakdown, commit him if necessary, and have every gossip columnist in New York speculating about Blackwood family scandals." Thomas's voice remained controlled, but Victoria recognized the warning tone. "No, we'll endure this spectacle, then work behind the scenes to minimize the damage." In the bridal suite, Rose stared at her reflection in the antique mirror, hardly recognizing the woman in the designer wedding gown. The dress had appeared in her room that morning, silk and lace worth more than she'd ever owned combined, fitted perfectly despite no one taking measurements. "You look beautiful, miss." Sarah, one of the younger housemaids, fastened the delicate pearl buttons, running up Rose's spine. The girl's excitement was infectious, treating this like a real fairy tale instead of the business transaction it truly was. Rose touched the simple pearl necklace, the only jewelry she owned, inherited from her grandmother. Among all this luxury, it felt like her only anchor to reality, Miss Rose. James Chen appeared in the doorway, looking unusually formal in his dark suit. "It's time." The ceremony would be small, just family, a few key business associates, and the household staff who'd been given the day off to attend. Marcus had explained this as wanting privacy, but Rose suspected it was really about limiting witnesses to his family's humiliation. The gardens were stunning despite the tension crackling through the air. White roses climbed trellises while string quartets played softly near the makeshift altar. If Rose didn't know better, she might believe someone actually cared about making this day special. Marcus waited at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the billionaire. Groom. But when their eyes met, Rose saw something unexpected. Nervousness, maybe even regret. For a moment he looked almost human. The officiant, a family friend who'd clearly been pressured into this duty, began the ceremony with barely concealed reluctance. Victoria sat ramrod straight in the front row, her smile so forced it looked painful. Thomas maintained stoic composure, but his disapproval radiated like heat. "Do you, Marcus James Blackwood, take Rose Catherine Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Marcus's pause lasted a heartbeat too long. "I do. Do you, Rose Catherine Sullivan, take Marcus James Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Rose thought of her mother, sleeping peacefully in the private medical facility where she'd been transferred that morning. The same morning Rose had signed papers ensuring Catherine would receive every treatment available, regardless of cost. "I do." The kiss was perfunctory, barely a brush of lips that sparked nothing but awkwardness. The applause was polite but lukewarm, except from the household staff, who seemed genuinely happy for what they thought was a love match. At the reception, Victoria maintained her social facade while introducing the new Mrs. Blackwood, with the enthusiasm of someone discussing root canal surgery. Rose played her part, making small talk with business associates, who clearly wondered what Marcus saw in the former kitchen help. "Quite a surprise, your marriage." Eleanor Rothschild, Victoria's closest friend and biggest gossip, cornered Rose by the champagne fountain. "So sudden, so unexpected." "Sometimes love happens when you least expect it," Rose replied, the practiced response Marcus had coached her on. "Indeed." Eleanor's smile was razor-sharp. "Though I must say, you're handling this transition remarkably well. From service to society overnight, that must be quite an adjustment." The condescension stung, but Rose had endured worse. "Marcus has been very supportive." Across the garden, Marcus watched the interaction with growing irritation. He'd expected his family's disapproval, but witnessing their cruelty toward Rose stirred unexpected protective instincts. "She's lovely," James commented, joining Marcus near the bar, handling herself with remarkable grace under the circumstances. Marcus's grip tightened on his champagne flute. "This is exactly what I wanted, watching them squirm." But even as he spoke the words, they felt hollow. Rose's quiet dignity in the face of his family's barely concealed hostility impressed him more than he'd anticipated. She wasn't playing victim or seeking sympathy. She was meeting their challenge with strength he hadn't known she possessed. As the evening wound down, Victoria cornered her son near the house. "I hope you're satisfied with this performance." "Completely." Marcus's smile was cold. "Did you enjoy meeting your new daughter-in-law?" "Don't be ridiculous. Whatever you're paying that girl, it won't last forever. When she realizes she'll never truly belong in our world, she'll take her money and disappear." Marcus watched Rose, accepting congratulations from the staff, her smile genuine for the first time all day. "Perhaps, but for now she's family. I trust you'll treat her accordingly." Victoria's laugh held no warmth. "Of course, darling. After all, we Blackwoods always know how to maintain appearances." As the last guests departed, Rose stood alone in the garden, still wearing her wedding dress but looking more isolated than celebrated. The fairy tale was over, and tomorrow the real challenge would begin, living with a man who'd married her to wound his family in a world where she'd never truly belong. Marcus approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood, how does it feel to be married to a billionaire?" Rose looked at him with eyes that held no illusion, like the most expensive business transaction of my life. Her honesty surprised him. Most people tried to flatter him, to gain his approval. Rose simply stated facts without pretense or manipulation. "Fair." Enough, he said quietly. The car is waiting to take you to your new room. We'll discuss the arrangements tomorrow. As Rose walked toward the house, her wedding dress trailing behind her, Marcus wondered if his perfect revenge might have created complications he hadn't anticipated. The game was just beginning, but already the rules felt less certain than he'd planned. The unexpected awakening. James Chen had worked for difficult people before Marcus Blackwood, but never someone so determined to remain miserable while possessing everything most people dreamed of. 3 weeks into Marcus's marriage, James found himself playing reluctant witness to a transformation his boss seemed desperate to deny. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," James announced, entering Marcus's penthouse office with his usual morning efficiency. He paused, noticing Marcus staring out the window instead of diving immediately into work. "Sir? She's down there again?" Marcus's voice carried a strange note James couldn't identify. "Third time this week." James moved to the window, following Marcus's gaze to the small park across from their building. Rose sat on a bench with an elderly homeless man, sharing what appeared to be sandwiches from a paper bag. She laughed at something the man said, her face bright with genuine amusement. "Mrs. Blackwood seems to have a generous spirit," James offered carefully. Marcus turned abruptly. "It's performance. She's trying to impress me with her charity work." But James had been watching too, and what he saw didn't look like performance. Rose's interactions with the homeless man appeared natural, comfortable, like she'd been visiting him regularly. She'd noticed him during her first week living in the penthouse, and rather than asking Marcus for money to give away, she'd started bringing her own lunch to share. Perhaps, James said diplomatically. "Shall I have the car brought around for your meeting with the Patterson Group?" "Cancel it. I need to attend to some domestic matters." James raised an eyebrow but made the necessary calls. Marcus had been finding increasingly creative excuses to work from home lately, always when Rose would be around. For someone trying to maintain emotional distance from his contract wife, he seemed remarkably interested in her schedule. That evening, Marcus found Rose in the penthouse's gourmet kitchen, something that had become a nightly ritual. Despite having access to the best restaurants in New York, she preferred cooking simple meals that reminded him uncomfortably of comfort food. "You don't have to cook," he said, loosening his tie as he watched her stir something that smelled like heaven. "We have staff for that." "I like cooking." Rose didn't look up from her task. "Besides, your housekeeper mentioned you barely eat when you're working late." The casual concern in her voice caught him off guard. "When was the last time anyone had worried about whether he ate properly? How's your mother?" The question surprised him. He hadn't planned to ask. Rose, S face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen her direct at him. "Better. Dr. Reyes says the new treatment is showing promising results. She's been asking about you." "About me?" "She wants to meet the man who saved her life." Rose's expression grew thoughtful. "I haven't told her about the arrangement. She thinks this is real." Something twisted in Marcus's chest. "And what would you tell her if she knew the truth? That sometimes guardian angels come in unexpected forms?" The simple honesty of her answer left him speechless. She wasn't trying to manipulate him or win points. She was just grateful, without expecting anything in return. "The Patterson Group was disappointed you cancelled today," James mentioned when he stopped by later that evening, finding Marcus and Rose eating dinner together at the breakfast bar instead of the formal dining room. "We can reschedule," Marcus replied, not taking his eyes off Rose as she described her mother's improvement. James noticed the shift. Marcus, who normally treated business as sacred, had been rescheduling meetings and cutting calls short whenever Rose was around. The man who'd built an empire on ruthless focus was becoming distracted by his fake wife's presence. "There's something else," James continued carefully. Victoria called. She's planning a charity luncheon next week and expects Rose to attend. As your wife, she'll be expected to contribute significantly. Marcus's jaw tightened. How much? The suggested donation is $50,000. For a new wife to contribute less would be noticed. Rose choked on her wine. $50,000 for lunch. Welcome to my family's world, Marcus said grimly. Everything is a competition, including charity. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. Marcus's tone brooked no argument. You'll attend, you'll write the check, and you'll let my mother and her friends know that Mrs. Marcus Blackwood doesn't do anything halfway. The protective edge in his voice surprised them both. This wasn't part of their business arrangement, Marcus defending Rose from his family's passive-aggressive warfare, but the thought of Victoria and her friends treating Rose like an imposter made him irrationally angry. Later, as James prepared to leave, he found Marcus standing in his study, staring at a family photograph from his childhood. She's not what you expected, is she? James asked quietly. Marcus didn't pretend to misunderstand. She's supposed to be simple, grateful for the money, happy to play her part and disappear when it's over. But she gave her entire first payment to her mother's medical team. All of it. Didn't keep a penny for herself. Marcus set down the photograph. Who does that, James? Who gives away $5 million without buying themselves anything? Someone who married you for love instead of money, James suggested gently. She didn't marry me for love. She married me for her mother. But even as Marcus said it, he wondered why that distinction was beginning to matter less. James left him, alone with thoughts that refused to organize themselves logically. Marcus had built his life on understanding people's motivations, on predicting their behavior based on self-interest. Rose defied every calculation. She woke early to cook breakfast she thought he might enjoy. She asked about his work with genuine interest, not because she wanted something, but because she seemed to care about his answer. She turned down his offer to buy her an entirely new wardrobe, saying she preferred earning things herself. Most unsettling of all, she treated their arrangement like a partnership instead of an employment contract. She remembered details about his preferences, laughed at his dry humor, and somehow made the sterile penthouse feel like a home. Marcus poured himself a scotch and tried to recapture the satisfaction he'd felt when planning this revenge. But Rose's quiet presence was changing something fundamental inside him, something he wasn't ready to name or acknowledge. The game he'd designed to hurt his family was becoming something else entirely. And Marcus Blackwood was discovering that some victories came with unexpected costs. The heart's surrender. Thomas Blackwood had built his fortune by reading people, their ambitions, their weaknesses, their breaking points. 67 years of business dealings had taught him that everyone had a price, everyone had an angle. But watching his son pace the hospital waiting room like a caged animal, Thomas encountered something that didn't fit his calculations. The surgery should be finished soon. Rose's voice was steady, despite her pale complexion, and the way her hands trembled slightly. Catherine's condition had worsened suddenly, requiring emergency surgery to remove complications from her treatment. Marcus hadn't left Rose's side for 6 hours. He'd cancelled board meetings, ignored urgent calls, and sat holding her hand while she tried not to fall apart. This wasn't the behavior of a man maintaining a business arrangement. Mr. Blackwood. Dr. Reyes emerged from the surgical wing, his expression cautiously optimistic. The surgery was successful. We were able to remove all the remaining tumors. Mrs. Sullivan is in recovery now. Rose sagged with relief, and Marcus's arm immediately went around her shoulders, supporting her weight as tears finally came. Thomas watched his son's face transform, the cold mask melting into something raw and protective. "Can I see her?" Rose whispered. "In a few hours, when she's stable. But the prognosis is excellent. With continued treatment, your mother should make a full recovery. After the doctor left, Rose turned to Marcus with eyes bright with tears and gratitude. Thank you for everything. I know this wasn't part of our deal. Stop. Marcus's voice was rough. Just stop talking about deals. Thomas cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. He'd arrived at the hospital after James called, expecting to find Marcus going through the motions of husbandly duty. Instead, he'd found his son genuinely distraught, pacing and snapping at anyone who suggested he leave. I need to speak with you, Marcus, privately. They moved to a quiet corner of the waiting area while Rose went to call her mother's friends with the good news. She's not what I expected, Thomas said, without preamble. Marcus' quote, laugh held no humor. That seems to be the consensus. When your mother told me about this marriage, I assumed you were having some kind of breakdown, a rebellion against everything we taught you about appropriate choices. Maybe I was. Thomas studied his son's profile as they both watched Rose through the glass partition, still on the phone, her face glowing with happiness as she shared her mother's recovery news. But that's not what this is anymore, is it? Marcus remained silent, but Thomas had his answer in the way his son's eyes tracked Rose's every movement, the unconscious protectiveness in his posture, the way he'd spoken her name when updating. The medical team. You love her. The words hung between them like a confession neither was prepared to address directly. It doesn't matter what I feel, Marcus said finally. This was supposed to be temporary. She agreed to 1 year, and she deserves to have her freedom when this is over. Does she want her freedom? Marcus turned to face his father fully. What kind of question is that? The kind that matters. Thomas's voice carried decades of regret. I married your mother for business reasons, a merger of families, fortunes, social positions. It was the practical choice, the smart choice, but I never gave her the chance to choose me for any other reason. The admission surprised Marcus. His parents had always presented their marriage as a partnership of equals, successful in every measurable way. Victoria and I have been companions, partners, co-parents, but we've never been lovers, never been friends. Thomas's gaze returned to Rose, who was now laughing at something someone said on the phone. That girl looks at you like you hung the stars, Marcus. When was the last time anyone looked at you that way? Never, Marcus realized. People looked at him with fear, respect, desire for his wealth or power. But Rose looked at him like he mattered as a person, not a bank account. She deserves better than a man who married her as part of a game. Then stop playing games. Thomas's voice carried surprising gentleness. Your mother and I may have failed at love, but we succeeded at raising a son who's capable of it. Don't waste that gift because you're afraid of being vulnerable. Later that evening, as Rose dozed in the chair beside her mother's hospital bed, Marcus found himself truly looking at her, not as his contract wife or his family's shock tactic, but as the woman who'd somehow become essential to his daily happiness. She, given up her own dreams to care for her mother. She'd married a stranger to save someone she loved. She'd faced his family's cruelty with dignity and turned his sterile penthouse into a home without asking for anything in return. Rose. He touched her shoulder gently, and she stirred, blinking up at him with sleepy confusion. Is something wrong? I need to tell you something. Marcus pulled a chair close to hers, his heart hammering with unfamiliar nervousness. This wasn't supposed to happen. What wasn't? This, us. The way I feel when you laugh at something stupid I said, or when you cook dinner because you think I might be hungry, or when you argue with me about business strategy like my opinion, actually matters to you personally. Rose sat up straighter, suddenly fully awake. Marcus, I married you to hurt my family. to prove a point about their shallow values and social pretensions. You were supposed to be a prop in my rebellion. Not. He struggled for words that had never come easily. Not the person I can't imagine living without. The silence stretched between them while Rose processed his confession. Marcus prepared himself for her anger, her disgust at being manipulated, her demands for immediate freedom from their arrangement. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. "I know," she said quietly. "You know? I figured it out pretty quickly. The timing, the family dynamics, the way you presented the offer." Rose's thumb traced across his knuckles. "What I didn't figure out was when it stopped being a game for you. About 3 weeks ago, when you started sharing your lunch with Harold in the park." Marcus lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to her fingers. "When I realized you were using your own money to help people, not mine. When I understood that everything you did came from who you are, not what you could gain. So what happens now?" Rose's voice carried hope and fear in equal measure. "Now I ask if you'll consider staying married to me for real. Not for money, not for contracts, but because somehow my fake wife became the most real thing in my life." Rose's smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face with radiant joy. "I thought you'd never ask." Their kiss was nothing like the perfunctory peck at their wedding ceremony. This was a promise, a beginning, a surrender to something neither had planned, but both desperately wanted. From her hospital bed, Catherine Sullivan smiled as she pretended to sleep, watching her daughter find the love she'd always deserved. Sometimes, she thought, the best things in life came disguised as business arrangements. Marcus Blackwood had set out to play a cruel game with his family's expectations. Instead, he'd discovered that the only game worth winning was the one where both players chose love over strategy, where the prize was building a life together rather than tearing others down. The billionaire who'd thought he had everything learned, that he'd been bankrupt in the only currency that truly mattered. But Rose had made him rich beyond measure, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Blackwood understood what it meant to be truly successful.